Edgar Cayce's Planetary Sojourn in Venus. Part 2. A soul's sojourn in Venus makes for a very attractive and beautiful soul. That soul returning to Earth will bring qualities of love, beauty, and friendliness to its relationships and surroundings. The influences in Venus we find make for the tender-hearted, sympathetic expressions. The influences from Venus make for one sympathetic, loving, if there is the tenderness and the temperament for those activities. In the Venus forces or influences, a sympathetic, a complementary tendency in the activities of the individual. Venus. Great friendships, great loves, the desire for associations. The friendships, as from the Venus influence, are very strong. Those, as we find from Venus, make for the inclinations for friendships that become deep and abiding. In Venus we find relationships as regarding friendships, marital relations. Those influences then that arise from the sojourns in Venus make for a loving, a sympathetic, a patient entity. In Venus we find that influence making for close friendships that become as strangers, even closer than the blood relations. Venus also brings an appreciation of beauty, of art, and of home and home surroundings. Venus makes for an easy disposition, very easily imposed upon. In the astrological aspects we find Venus as a ruling influence, making for those periods when the friendships have become both good and bad, or have brought into the mental experience beautiful experiences. In Venus we find a benevolent influence. Hence, as is indicated, love, patience, brotherly love, gentleness become necessary forces in the material aspects of the entity in the present sojourn. Those influences from that sojourn of the entity in Venus make for a pleasing personality. Then show mercy in thy judgments, then show patience with thy foe, thy friend, even as thy God, even as thy ideal his Son in the earth has shown. In Venus we find the love, the home, the artistic temperament, music, but more than all the entity should be in that endeavor, as a hobby or as an outlet for the activities of decorating china. This to the entity is an outlet, as will be seen, for a helpfulness, as well as the expression of the harmony desired, and a part of the entity's experience. In Venus we find the friendships that have been experienced that have become a very great part of the entity's individuality. And these are well. Yet in friends, in those near and dear to the entity has come disappointments. And these have made for confusions. But give that thou hast of thyself and leave the results, the growth, with God. Venus makes for that inclination towards those things that are lovely, whether they bespeak of the material, the mental or spiritual aspects of individuals, things, circumstances, or conditions. These then will make for those influences in the experience where the entity, unless keeping self in a line of service or duty, may become upset by those of the opposite sex. In Venus we find the innate longing for a companionship. Those whom the entity chooses as friends are few. That innate tenderness of love, affection, or sympathy is as an expression of the entity's experience in the material associations. In Venus we find that as may be termed the greater humanitarian experience of the entity, as well as the great material, the great mental love. As love is the influence that moves many people. Hence this humanitarian influence should be cultivated in the experience of the entity with that tolerance, with that sensitiveness. From the Venus sojourn we find that while not that there is not sentiment, not that there is not affection or love that finds expression in the material human experience, but rather from those activities of the entity in those environs. These must be expressive of concrete experiences in the associations of the entity. In Venus there is the making for those innate, oft so greater than material manifestations. But the deeper feelings of appreciation of those influences in individual lives that produce that which is the fruit. Not the tree, not the vine, not the branches, but the fruit of the Spirit, love, patience, long-suffering, brotherly love, kindness, that brings into the consciousness of each soul that material things are after all but the shadows rather than the reality, and that what may be purposed or purchased with other than the soul and blood of itself is but naught in eternity, that to which is bound each soul as with the cords of divinity itself.